protect your back. So the Turks, in that sense, do need NATO, realize that NATO is an important component, and to a large extent, being a member of NATO gives them a certain amount of freedom of action that they would not normally have, that they would worry about otherwise. So NATO, in that sense, is very, very important. Yet, you're seeing now constantly this game being played with NATO. I mean, there's enormous amount of very nasty rhetoric coming out of Ankara about not just the United States, but also NATO. We had last week, one of the Turkish MPs had this and made all the newspapers in big letters that NATO is a terrorist organization. And he's from the ruling AKP. So, I mean, you have a very essentially negative rhetoric, partially because again, because of Syria. But I would argue that there is something else that's going on. Let me also add, I mean, you're seeing now that the Turks are talking about buying S-400 missiles from Russia. And then they're not going to be integrated in NATO because these are not exactly NATO-compatible missiles. But we don't know whether this is also a little bit of a dance. It's a way of sending messages to the new administration. But we also have a new administration that has said that, remember, NATO is caduc, or is so maybe in that sense there is some similar thing. But seriously speaking, I think NATO is still there. It's still very important. And look, as angry as the Turks are with the Americans, they have not stopped U.S. flights from Incirlik against ISIS. They could have done it. That doesn't mean kicking the United States out of Incirlik. They can stop the flights out of Incirlik. They're creating problems on a daily basis, from what I understand, is the bureaucratic hassles that the U.S. has to deal with. But the most important change that has happened, and we don't know the impact of this, after the coup, 149 generals and admirals were kicked out of the Turkish military. This is 46% of the Turkish general staff. Now, we know that those 149 were not involved in the coup, because had they been involved in the coup, there would have been more than 6,000 or 10,000 soldiers out in the streets. I mean, 149 generals, I would hope, can command more troops than 6,000. So this was and it happened essentially very quickly, which means that this was a pre-planned purge of the military, and maybe it also explains why there was an attempted coup by some elements. But when you look at who are these generals, you do realize that many of them, and maybe most of them, I mean, it's very hard to figure that out concretely, but many of them are or were pro-American, pro-NATO generals. And they are being replaced now, presumably, with much more nationalist generals. So the consequences of that in terms of the long term are actually quite serious, because now you have a new set of very senior officers who do not share the, shall we say, the history of the alliance, the sympathy to the alliance. That doesn't mean that they will get out of NATO, but it does mean that there's a question mark now about the relationship with NATO. I mean, there's been a lot of talk in the Turkish press about leaving NATO and joining the Shanghai Cooperation Agreement. I don't take these things seriously, but I do believe that the relationship with NATO is going to become much more difficult, precisely because of this new cadre of generals who are, and let's face it, I mean, Erdogan is going to win the referendum. He's going to be president for a long time to come, and his sympathies are a little bit in that. So there may be a shift going